Hello there, friends. Welcome to another episode of Brown Bags and Bibles and Books. My name is Scott Wakefield, lead pastor at First Christian Church of Greene County, Tennessee, joined as always by
Mark Liebert, another elder at First Christian Church.
Another elder.
Because you are an elder as well.
Nice, thank you.
And Scott's wingman.
Wingman indeed. This is week 3 of the wingman.
Yes.
We are wingman for good. We are co-conspirators. No, we're not co-conspirators.
No,
we're co-laborers.
That's better.
There we go. We're glad you're here with us for the last week of going through The Gathering Storm by Dr. Albert Mohler. We've talked about lots of things, and we're going to finish up with chapters 7 through 9, The Gathering Generational Storm, The Gathering Storm and the Engines of Culture, and then finally,
Religious Liberty.
The Gathering Storm over Religious Liberty.
Right.
So this is live, so jump in the comments, give us a thumbs up that you're here, that you're with us, that you're following along, and feel free to jump in and give us some questions as we go. And we will try to hit those in the last 15 minutes or so. We'll go 30-ish minutes and then 15-ish and end up 15 minutes over like we always do.
That's correct. Somehow that math never works.
We'll plan for 45 and go 60. Awesome. All right, so The Gathering Generational Storm. Where do we start here, Mark?
Well, we mentioned briefly in other chapters moral therapeutic deism, MTD. It's the prevalent view that's taking over Christianity now, unless we're careful to know the Word of God and to proclaim it clearly. And what it is, we've said it before, there's a God out there who wants people to be good, nice, and fair. The central goal of life is be happy and feel good about yourself.
You've just named the deism and the therapeutic part there.
Yeah. And it's non-judgmental. That's the moral part. It's non-judgmental. Like we shouldn't suggest someone else is wrong, especially about their faith or belief. And if we come down too hard on saying here's right and here's wrong, well, they're very uncomfortable with that. Yeah. So religion should be nice.
I was just talking today with someone about how we live in a culture now, a pluralistic world, where the existence of something means its truth is valid from the get-go.
Just
you're not supposed to test it. You're not supposed to. Just the mere existence is all that's needed for it to be right and good.
Yeah, this MTD, moral therapeutic deism, resembles a lot of the deism of the 1700s. So easy way to look at it, God is more of a divine butler or a cosmic therapist and less of a holy judge.
He just wants you to be happy.
Yes, he does.
He just wants you to be happy.
Right. Yeah. It's very self-centered, exceedingly tolerant. Self-improvement is critically important. And the highest aspirations in life are to be happy, secure, and find meaning.
Yeah, and self-improvement to the detriment of my responsibility to others. Yeah. Ironically, in a culture where we're supposed to be tolerant of others. Good people go to heaven when they die, and everybody's good. Right. People aren't bad. Yeah. God only needs to be involved when I need him.
Yes.
He's a fixer God. Yeah,
this Mohler talks about a study that happened in 2005, which of course now is clearly outdated. So this sociologist went back and looked at it currently to see about these youngsters that he had reviewed at the time who are now close to 20 to 30 year old or so, and found that this growing up with this belief had impacted them significantly. So they're not sure about reality. They question whether it's possible to know anything with certainty.
Yes.
And they insist, as you pointed out, any perspective is as valid as the next.
Yeah. I think a number of younger folks who seem sort of, and I understand this, paralyzed. Yeah. They're paralyzed in part because the proliferation of options, all of which are valid, and I have to choose something that's a limited something from all these options. I think that's an outgrowth of MTD.
Yeah. So they don't see themselves as related in any formal way to a church, a religious belief, or a religious institution. Yeah. But I love that Mohler pointed out one area for hope in this chapter, which is important. He said, young adults who remain closely connected to their parents or other adults are far more likely to remain connected and committed to churches and beliefs. Yeah. Like that intergenerational connection is critical.
It is.
In my own life, I'm so thankful that my 3 children who are now adults had other godly adult influences in their life besides their mother and me.
Yeah.
Like that was critical.
A number of studies have shown that. There's a pretty well-known one out of the Youth Institute at Fuller Seminary. Kara Powell, I think is her name. And it's she's written quite a bit about it. The sticky faith, I think, is all along the lines of, interestingly, with these younger generations who have this moralistic therapeutic deism kind of understanding of the entire world, really, not just Christianity.
Right, it's a worldview.
That they are far more influenced in the long term by intergenerational mentoring, teaching. Their parents, the relationship with the parents is far more important than you think it might be, which is ironic given that our next chapter is going to be about the engines of culture that have been infecting or affecting them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He just pointed out a couple trends that I thought were interesting. In 2000, 41% of Americans said they attended church at least, I think it was once a week or maybe it was once a month. I wrote once a week in my notes, but
no, it can't be right.
Once a month?
Yeah.
In 2019, that same number had dropped from 41% to 29%.
That's a big change.
It is in 2 decades.
Yeah.
And now 36% of anyone aged 18 to 34 says they never attend church. Yeah. So
the recent numbers I know say that your average active person in any church in America goes 3 out of 8 possible times over the span of 2 months.
Yeah, I know that you've pointed that out. Like when people say, yes, this is my church and I'm active and I attend there regularly.
Yeah.
If we actually look at the times we go, it's far fewer than we think.
Yeah.
Whether it's vacations, out of town, whatever.
Yeah. Which means that the sort of cultural understanding that church is a place for moral strengthening to happen.
Yeah. Which I think leads us, and we're going quickly because we have the 3 chapters to cover, but like what can Christians do as an answer to this trend of the younger generation to distance themselves from their parents, from their churches, from their rootedness in religion, based on a differing worldview entirely?
Yes.
And so I think 3 things. I think parents making sure church is the highest priority for the family's weekly schedule. He said that.
Yes.
And that is going to run counterintuitive to a lot of people.
That's cultural heresy.
It is.
Even Christian cultural heresy.
Very much so. So what we're saying here, and again, not trying to make you angry, whoever you may be, but if we push sports, music, ballet, and those things get in the way of the church family and life and the connection and the intergenerational and all of that, then what we're saying is church is optional.
Yes.
That's what we're teaching.
When we treat that as something that's going to be there when I need it, when I know the time is there, when I have a God can fix me in my moment of despair thing. Yeah. I know that's there as a backup.
Right.
But plans A, B, and C are these other things.
Yeah. Like for you as parents, you understand the value of church, but what your kids will pick up is not the value of church if it's sacrificed on the altar of all of the extracurricular.
What do you think we're communicating?
Right. We're teaching by our lifestyle.
Yes.
And again, we're not saying don't be involved in youth, don't take your kid to sports or whatever, ballet, music. Those are all good things, but choose wisely and make sure that the family schedule points to the priority of Christ and his church.
Yeah. So when we started doing travel soccer, we said, okay, we're going to do this in this kind of way, and here's why you can miss 2 times an entire season from Sunday mornings, and that's it.
Yeah.
Because and we would say, hey, coach, here's why we are not going to make this a higher priority, and that's just going to have to be how this rolls.
Yeah. So I just encourage you, if you're a parent out there, consider wisely the impact of what you're teaching your children by the priorities of your family's schedule.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What else can we say?
Likewise, we need to be serious about the effects of technology and social media.
Yeah. You may, as a parent, feel out of touch or ill-equipped to deal with pornography and comparison and externals and image and identity issues, everything that comes with the screen.
Those are huge. Huge factors.
But there are people who can help you navigate those waters. Yeah. And there are companies working really hard now to stay ahead of that curve. And your child who's 7 doesn't have to have a smartphone.
Why are you talking about my youngest?
Well, I didn't know how
who is almost 8.
But
she doesn't have a smartphone.
But sometimes we get caught up in that and we're not as careful as we should be. So choose wisely what screen time they have access to, where they have access to it, and then what filters and parameters and guidelines you have to protect your child, not just from pornography, but from everything that comes with it.
Yeah.
I mean, TikTok by itself, it feeds you what you want to hear, and it's more of the same and more of the same. And there's a whole culture out there that is all about, look at me, I'm dysfunctional and love me for it, and it celebrates that and it promotes that.
Yes.
Is that what we're trying to teach our kids? So.
Yes, a couple things. One, when you just said, it feeds me what I want, my first thought was, our definition, we've talked about this before, our definition of the desires of the heart, what it means to make a human choice, what it means to have free will, is a definition that we choose out of our desire.
Okay.
And if we assume that the human heart's depraved, then what that screen's going to do is feed that depraved desire.
Right. All the algorithms work that way.
Exactly where I was headed, which is the computer algorithms are set to do that.
Yeah.
Which is terrifying.
It is. Yeah. So you end up just hearing and seeing what you were interested in to begin with, and it just feeds that over and over and over and over. It's not true discussion. It's not differing views.
Right. No, it's not.
And it's unhealthy in multiple ways.
The other thing I was going to do there, and the other thing I was going to say that will thoroughly drive the nail in the coffin of we are clearly countercultural Luddite weirdos. Luddite is the Luddites in the Industrial Revolution in Britain said all this new machine and technology fanciness is going to put people out of jobs. So they were anti-technology.
Gotcha. Thank you for defining. I didn't know. I didn't know what that was.
I hate to say it this way, but I think it's true. Dr. Dobson was 100% right on correct. When he was saying in front of the Senate, here's what pornography does.
Yeah.
Here's the effect of media on our children.
Yeah.
He was poo-pooed as just a backwoods dummy.
Yep.
But he was right all along about that. And the screen access and technology that has proliferated, and everybody's got one now, in fact, multiple, just makes that more of an issue.
Yeah.
So, we got to move on.
So, last thing here from chapter 7, what else can parents do? So he said, make church a priority where it should be serious about the effects of technology and the screen, and thirdly, fill your homes with the gospel. Worship, Bible study, scripture, and not just all serious stuff. I remember Chip Ingram saying, family time made a huge difference because they had fun together.
Sure.
And I think I said it before, but one of his daughters, after she was grown, wrote him and said, Dad, you know what had the biggest impact on my life? Keeping me in the church, helping me to understand and believe and follow what you were saying and live it out in my life was all the fun we had together.
Yeah.
It wasn't your fantastic devotionals because you're so brilliant.
Yeah.
It was because you and Mom led us to have fun together as a family, and we learned together, and there was a connection there with your generation.
I'm still holding out that the first half of that is what my kids remember.
Well, it's important. It's important. Fill your homes with the gospel and gospel life.
Yeah.
Chapter 7.
Chapter 8, The Gathering Storm and Engines of Culture. Entertainment, the moral influence of Hollywood. An important point that he says early on is that entertainment is never purely to entertain. Everything that we come across has an agenda.
Yeah.
And it is teaching us constantly.
If we can just take that away from this chapter, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
So that what you're subjecting yourself to and finding entertaining or letting your kids watch, put a filter in to say, what is their worldview and how are they teaching it?
Absolutely.
And do I accept it or do I reject it?
Absolutely.
And teach your kids to do the same thing.
From day one.
And this is true about every book that's ever been written. It has an agenda. What is that agenda? Understand the agenda behind the entertainment, and you can protect yourself and your children better.
Yeah, it's we live in a cultural moment now where this makes sense to say, but a little bit ago this would have sounded silly. But the idea that there is amoral, that without moral, that the idea that there is amoral media or movies, or that this stuff is just entertainment by itself, so it's just about fun. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
There is an agenda to all of these now. It used to be a bit of a factor. Now it is one of the main factors for what drives, for example, movie studios to do movies a certain way or not.
Yeah. We said this before, but it bears repeating quickly. There's great pressure within Hollywood to stay ahead of the cultural curve.
Yeah.
Like they don't want to be caught being behind the times.
Yes. And one of the things, once you begin to look into this is you begin to realize that even Marxist ideologies that are based on this idea of cultural production is the way that we make political agendas happen.
Right.
That's been going on for a long time.
Right.
For many years, through entertainment, movies, shows. When this comes at us, we are learning a particular worldview. And nowadays, you cannot watch anything without the majority of shows, commercials, advertisements, company policies, government policies, all various forms of media. You can't watch anything without it being a particular activistic agenda.
Right. It has a worldview. Make sure you're in tune to what the worldview is that's being sold you in these, whatever these are.
Yeah.
And so we started with Hollywood, but it's also in Wall Street and companies out there.
Yep.
I feel it in mine. I know that companies are so concerned about being relevant culturally in order to attract and retain talent that they will do whatever's necessary to stay ahead of that curve.
Yeah.
And so, for example, 5 years ago now, in 2016, 50% of corporations, that was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
They avoided doing events in states where there was perceived anti-LGBTQ legislation.
Yeah.
Just if it was perceived. They didn't want to be associated with it. That was 50% of corporations.
That's a fascinating statistic.
5 years ago.
Yeah. Woke capitalism and companies virtue signaling in order to stay relevant.
Right.
If the bottom line is the dollar for them, they will do what they have to do. They will lie all day long about what the people within that company may actually believe on the whole in order to make sure that they stay relevant in those ways.
Yeah.
And all of that has an effect culturally.
It does. Yeah. Yep.
Silicon Valley.
Yeah. Facebook, Twitter, all of it.
Yeah.
I didn't realize this. Facebook has more than a quarter of the world's population in their membership.
Oh, absolutely.
Whoa.
It's considerably larger and, in a sense, clearly more powerful than any nation.
That's amazing.
Think about the idea that they could probably predict you and I are doing this show right now.
Sure.
They know where we live. They know our buying habits.
There's a bot out there listening to us.
There is a bot out there listening to us. I'll get to that in a second. They know our buying habits. They can predict where we'll be next, what we'll buy, how much we're going to spend on it. Do we shop at a Target or do we shop at a Walmart, or are we going to Dollar General a lot?
Yeah, and you've all seen
and they'll make our screens and the things they design for us based around that kind of information.
You
That's
see
a ton of power.
You see pop-up ads for things you didn't actually request yet, but somehow it knew.
Yes,
but there are ways they do that. It's not like mysticism.
No, but they are they're not just social connection vehicles.
No.
And they have stated
that's how it started.
Yes, that started as a social connection vehicle. Facebook now, though, has said we are a provider of content and information.
Yes.
So that's a huge shift.
We produce it, we edit it, and we manage it.
This is not just about the social connection.
No.
This is about the management and provider of content and information. That's a huge shift.
They've changed in what their goal is. Like in 2018, if you remember, Twitter took down campaign ads that were against Planned Parenthood.
Yes.
Because they disagreed with their worldview. And so instead of allowing that to be out there, they decided to take it down.
Right.
Of course, we all know about the recent things Facebook and Twitter and others have done with the president. But these are just examples of the fact that the power of Silicon Valley and social capital is so much greater than it used to be, and now the perspective of how they're using it has changed.
Yes, the management of content is itself an engine of culture.
Yeah.
Like it or not, aware or not, it's a gargantuan piece of this gathering storm that Mohler is talking about here. We were recently banned as a church from purchasing ads or boosting posts because we supposedly ran ads that, quote, involve social issues, elections, or politics.
Yeah.
I can't for the life of me think of what would have qualified.
I don't know.
But because we've never run ads for anything other than sermon series.
Yeah, come hear our sermon series.
Yeah, come hear this series. So, yeah.
So we mentioned Hollywood, Silicon Valley. We mentioned Wall Street, corporations, universities. You've said it multiple times.
Yes, for decades.
Yeah, they were
universities
well ahead of the curve.
Well ahead, and I think the cultural effect of this is people coming out of the universities being a part of culture.
Yeah. It's interesting. He says professors increasingly see their jobs as agents of cultural change and ideological indoctrination. And one professor said, we need to encourage everyone to attend college for as many years as they possibly can in the hope that they might get some exposure to the world outside their town and to moral ideas not exclusively derived from their parents' religion.
Yes.
Well, that's pretty obvious.
It is obvious.
Yeah. So keep them in college so we can separate them from what their parents believed.
That has been going on in higher education for decades.
Yeah.
Parents totally unaware.
Yeah. And Scott and I were talking, there's also engines of culture, conspiracy theories on all sides.
Sure.
Left, right, all over the place. One is QAnon, this crazy conspiracy that the U.S. government itself is controlled by a global network of Satan-worshiping, cannibalistic, sex-trafficking pedophiles, including prominent Democratic politicians, Hollywood celebrities. And so Trump is waging a holy war against them.
I didn't know about the cannibalism piece. I had not heard
read that.
piece.
Yeah.
Wow. I knew about the rest of it, but...
Yeah, and sex trafficking is a real issue.
Absolutely.
But if you want a cause that's not conspiratorial and something you can throw your weight behind, I have a good friend from high school that I dated. We're good, Beth Ann, we're good. It's Tina. She is the program director of recoveryofchildren.org. Fantastic organization that is truly working to rescue females, especially victims of sex trafficking. Like, that's real. Don't go for QAnon.
Yes. So the Christian answer to this, akin to what we've been talking about, is something that starts with parents. We must be light in our workplaces and point to Christ with courage and integrity. Yeah. We must be the filter for our children until they've learned to be that for themselves. Yeah. That's key. Yeah. That's key. I think a lot of parents sort of functionally give up at a certain age, and you're going to be in the world, therefore, and like a flip of a switch happens, and boom, we're hands off. Well, I don't think that's quite helpful. Yeah. We must be the filter until they have learned to do so for themselves, which means ensure they can be the filter for themselves.
Have these conversations.
Which is to say, we must teach the children to be discerning.
Yes, discerning of truth and error. Help them understand the messages and the worldview of the entertainment and media that they are subjecting themselves to. Yes. Like, can you identify it? Yes. Can you articulate it? And can you defend biblically why it's wrong? Yes. And it's a lie?
You and I are probably a little weird on this, but from day one with my kids, while we're consuming media, entertainment, books, etc., I would sit there and ask questions like, hey, what are they trying to sell you here? How are they doing that? What does how they're doing tell you about the product they're really trying to sell? And what's the goal of this here? And just unpacking that and deconstructing in a way that helps build in Christian worldview.
Yeah, you and I aren't very nice to sit with our children when we watch shows. We're very disruptive.
Disagreed.
There's a 3-part program, and this came out in 1990. In a book called After the Ball, by Harvard-trained gay authors who said, how do we change the culture to swing to our viewpoint? And they said, desensitize, jam, and convert. Yeah. Desensitize is lower the emotional reactions. Present things with humor so they're attractive. Even if it's a worldview you disagree with, make it funny and entertaining and interesting.
Will and Grace was a show that was one of those first for me where excellent. I thought, they're hilarious. They're so likable. Right. And...
Yep. That's desensitizing. The next level is jam, which is attach a sense of shame for bigotry to an opposite worldview. And how do you do that? You juxtapose pictures of hatred with victims of crime. And so if you hear of or read or see someone who identifies as gay or lesbian and they were beat up for it, well, of course you're appalled. Yes. You should be appalled. Mm-hmm. That's wrong. But then that becomes the picture that's associated with anyone who disagrees with the choices they make. And you become a bigot.
Which is why words are now weapons. Yeah.
Yep.
I was thinking in some of this about Herbert Marcuse, Marcuse. In talking about the universities thing, he has an essay called Repressive Tolerance, which is an ironically titled essay. But he basically said that to free the mind to rationally pursue truth meant that we must culturally practice a deliberate, liberating tolerance that would involve, this is a quote, the withdrawal of toleration of speech and assembly from groups and movements on the right, an aggressively partisan promotion of speech and groups and progressive movements on the left, which is part of how that jamming has been taking place.
And the last step was convert. And this goes along with what you said earlier about a Marxist view of using the means of production to change culture. They said use the media to cause a warm regard for what once was previously disapproved.
Yeah.
Use the media to do so. It's those engines of culture that drive the change. Yeah.
Yes. After the Ball was, and it's even hard to find probably now. I looked for it this past summer online. It's really expensive. That book was a substantively important book for the LGBTQ movement.
Yeah. Before there was tea.
Yes, before there was tea.
I think lastly here, chapter 8, parents must encourage their children to follow godly role models. They exist, whether it's actors or musicians or sports figures. They're out there. Follow them as they work. Tony Dungy is a godly example of an NFL coach and Hall of Fame. He's a former player.
Sure.
I follow a number. I know my boys follow a number of sports figures that I approve of.
Yeah.
These are godly men who are fighting against the engines of culture. But parents also must encourage their children, especially if you're at a secular campus, find those Christian ministries, those Christian campus ministries. That'll help you. Yeah. That's been huge for our youngest, who is at a state university.
Yeah, or an actual local church.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy idea. Chapter 9 is the gathering storm of religious liberty.
Look at us. We're on our third chapter
fly
already.
through this.
We're doing fantastic.
Are we? So, religious liberty. It's a part of the fabric of our nation and its establishment. It's the First Amendment.
Yes, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech. First Amendment.
Yes. Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. You can't take them away rights. And those are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Liberty, right there.
Yep.
It's in our First Amendment, and it's built into our Declaration of Independence, but that's increasingly being taken away.
Because religious liberty is now seen as religious privilege.
That's a really good point.
Yes.
Yes.
That's a great, I like how he says that.
Yeah.
Because that's functionally how, this is the place that discussion's happening. Religious liberty is not where this discussion's actually even happening right now.
Right.
It's about this privilege thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and he named a number of recent attacks on religious liberty. You've heard of him in the news, whether you're a cake baker, a florist, or a photographer. Just a couple years ago, the fire chief of Atlanta.
That's right. He wrote a little Bible study.
Apart from work.
Yes, apart from work.
For his men's Bible study.
Yeah. About
his views, which were Christian and biblical, when he was fired. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're hearing more and more of that. It's now considered privilege, not a right. Yeah. Yeah. I think the one we've mentioned in other episodes we did is the Equality Act.
Yes, this is big.
I think it's worth bringing up again because Biden did promise to pass that within his first 100 days.
Yes.
He called it a top legislative priority. I looked up his words so I don't misquote him.
Yeah.
And it sounds fantastic. Who wouldn't want the Equality Act to be passed?
Right.
Well, if I can give a different term for it, this might help you. It's the Religious Discrimination Act.
It is. Functionally.
So if you think of it in terms of let's pass the Religious Discrimination Act,
yes.
Well, that sounds totally different.
What makes you call it that, Mark?
Because first of all, it codifies sexual orientation and gender identity as protected classes. You're like, well, we shouldn't discriminate. Okay, hang on.
There are already laws against that discrimination,
right?
For the record.
It does several things. First of all, it makes a Christian worldview of sexuality hatred and bigotry.
Yes.
It could remove the tax-exempt status from churches, colleges, charities.
Yes.
Ultimately, it's a threat to any Orthodox faith, Christian, Catholic, Jew, or Muslim,
Yes.
who believes other than what our culture believes on LGBTQ legislation. That's ultimately what it is.
Yeah.
So it would forbid, this to me is the biggest thing, it would forbid churches or nonprofits that are religious from requiring their employees to live out their religious beliefs.
Yes.
So if one of our staff who is hired
Yes.
and agrees with our statement of faith suddenly has a change and says, I no longer agree with that, we would feel obligated to protect our organization and what we believe to let them go.
Yes.
But if we let them go on that basis, now we are crossing into the realm of a protected class, sexual orientation and gender identity, and we could get in trouble for that.
Yes, which renders our statement of faith functional useless, except in the places where it agrees with the cultural narrative on that particular issue, or any such issue that they would like to.
Yeah. And you may think, well, how can we do so today? How can churches and Christian universities and religious nonprofits maintain statements of faith today and have people adhere to those? Because there are religious exemption laws built in multiple places in our country.
Yes.
They're built in.
Yes.
I was talking to someone this week who said, well, that's common sense that you would allow a religious organization to hire people according to their beliefs and live that way.
Sure.
Yes, common sense. But if you elevate sexual orientation and gender identity to a protected class of non-discrimination laws and you eliminate the religious exemption aspect, then you have removed the foundation to allow common sense to rule. That's the danger.
Yeah.
So religious foster care and adoption agencies couldn't operate according to their beliefs.
Right.
A creative professional or business owner who wants to live according to their beliefs couldn't do so. It just puts incredible pressure on those who would believe other than the mainstream culture to live out their faith and do so with their employees in a way that honors God, because it becomes bigotry, hate speech, and it's against the law.
And one of the things that I think is a long-term unintended consequence of things that are being spoken as if this is about the safety of people is that it will end up making us an even far more litigious
much more
society.
Much more.
And I think it's not going to help speech become more kind and tolerant ultimately. And it's going to create a cultural fear that is going to, it's not going to help human flourishing and relationships and intimacy and care for one's fellow. Why would I care when I now have to be far more self-protective?
Right.
Just a few things off the top of my head that I think are going to be long-term consequences if that does indeed happen.
Yeah. It already was approved by the House.
Yeah.
It just hasn't been approved by the Senate yet.
Yes.
But as we know,
it's going to be.
The Senate is now 50-50 with the tiebreaker vote cast by Kamala Harris as the vice president.
Yes.
So just to be aware of that. Is that the end of the world? No. And we'll get there. It's not the end of the world.
No.
Is it cause for despair? No. But is it something worth fighting against as long as we have the democratic process to do so? Yes, because it's not helpful. Now, there is some legislation that's been proposed by others called Fairness for All, which is this idea that let's create legislation that protects people but doesn't cause one group to have to acquiesce to what the other one says.
Yeah.
So fairness for all. So churches, universities that are Christian, you can live out according to your faith as you would. Mm-hmm. But if you're a secular organization and you're hiring, you have to make sure you don't discriminate. Well, I agree with that in theory.
Yes.
I completely agree with that in theory.
Yes.
But is that possible to do? That's the question. Because the concern is, and I've said it before, if one side wants complete dominance and control, it will accept nothing short of that.
That's right. That's the idea of Marcuse's repressive tolerance.
Yeah. So I would love fairness for all. We'll see. Something worth praying about.
Yes. So what is the Christian answer when it comes to this question of religious liberty, which we've just touched on, but...
Well, can we mention the Supreme Court briefly? Is that all right?
It is all right.
Okay. I found this interesting. The Supreme Court has decided 15 cases on religious freedom in the last decade.
Yes.
And all 15 of them were wins for religious freedom, which is great on the surface of it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because someone pointed out, and I think they're right, why did it have to rise to the level of the Supreme Court to begin with? Because at the lower level, in the lower courts, religious freedom is being threatened.
Yeah.
So it had to rise to the level that it's never risen to before.
Yeah.
So thankfully, at least at that point, they stood for it. And one of the things I'm thankful Trump did was he appointed 3 new judges that I believe will work to preserve the original meaning of the Constitution rather than reinterpreting it, being Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett. But it's just interesting because it's taken the Supreme Court to be the last stand to say, no, we need to protect religious freedom.
It shows the trajectory.
It shows where the rest of the society has gone, and it was just there at the last stopgap that it was prevented from continuing.
Yeah. Almost as if there is a cultural fear of dealing with that at the levels below until we're going to let them.
Let the SCOTUS deal with it.
Yeah, because that's too...
Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that briefly because I am thankful for the stand they've taken, but it's alarming that it is rising to that level at this point.
Yeah.
So what do we do? What's our Christian answer?
We stand for the truth that male and female is God's design.
That's God's design. It's rooted in biology, right?
Yep. We affirm the dignity and value of every human being.
Every human being. Don't ever hear us say differently. We believe all humans, men, women, people who believe with you and don't agree with you, all equal in value.
Yeah, I don't think we're here yet, but I think soon enough because all directions sociopolitically, all directions that don't have margins and don't have an external authority apart from self, all directions will end up eating their own young, so to speak, and will have sociocultural consequences that people are going to have to deal with. And it's not like government, society, and politics is going to be able to do that. So part of why I'm saying this is affirming the dignity and value of all human beings is that we as Christians are going to have a uniquely helpful place in actually living that out in ways that who else cares about that really?
Yeah, that's right.
On what basis does any non-religious, non-moral institution that doesn't have an external authority, on what basis do they care about the value of human beings?
That's our job.
Yeah, from humans themselves?
Yeah.
We proclaim the beauty of God's design for sex.
Yeah, it's limited to marriage of one man, one woman. Anything outside of that is against God's will because it's harmful. It's not according to the designer.
And it's important for us to remember, we're talking about this in the context of religious liberty.
Right.
And these are particularly hot-button cultural issues that need us to say, God's design for sex is this, and here's why.
Yep.
And that's a helpful part of religious liberty continuing to be possible.
Right.
We fight for the uniqueness of marriage between one man and one woman.
I loved what someone said. I thought this was so helpful. If an alien came to Earth and they didn't speak our language and they just watched human activity, and then after a month, they went back and reported to their planet what they observed, what they would say is there's a bunch of people who are in charge of the planet, all very different from each other, all doing different things, but there's a unique relationship that I've noticed that when this man and this woman get together, wow, they create more of their own kind.
Yeah.
That is a unique relationship. Like an alien not knowing anything about morals would say there's something unique and powerful about the man-woman relationship because it's the only one that brings offspring.
Right, and that's why it's unique.
Yes.
It's the only one that does that.
Right. Like an alien would see that, but we miss it.
Yeah. We also need to be an advocate for cosmic justice, not social justice.
Yeah, from God's perspective.
Yes.
Right. All human beings deserve to be treated with dignity as image bearers of God. We fight for that. We hate partiality. We hate favoritism because God hates it.
God hates partiality.
Which means, Christian, especially white Christian, if you have someone who's talking about race issues, engage in those discussions.
Sure.
Find out another perspective than your own. Have that conversation because God hates partiality and hates favoritism. So we may have blind spots. Listen.
We need to reject the lie of the sexual revolution.
Yeah, and I think we said this last week. The problem is our world says our identity is in sexual orientation and expression. But the reality is, if you take young people in their 20s who are newly married, let's give them the benefit of the doubt for how much sexual activity they have.
Yeah.
Let's say it comes up to 1%, because I did the math. I said, let's say someone, I did this the other day. Let's say a couple has sex 4 to 5 times a week and it takes 30 minutes each time. Okay. No comments.
All right.
That equates to 1%
I'm loving this. Keep
of
going.
their weekly time they're allotted by God. 1%.
Okay.
And that's at the extreme end.
Wow. Extreme. I don't know. I'm at least 45 to 60 minutes. So
For the average couple, it would be much more like 0.5%, 1%.
Can we delete that from the?
No, this is important. But
I
yet
just meant my comment.
we define that 1%
Yes.
as our identity.
Absolutely. That's a good
What are
point.
we doing? Defining 1% of our life as our identity.
Yeah, it's absolutely silly when you put it in those mathematical terms.
Yeah. So what is our identity? Scott, you hammered this from the pulpit, if we had pulpits, the last couple times. We are children of God, made in the image of God. As Christians chosen by God, rescued, ransomed, redeemed by Jesus Christ because of the love of God.
Yeah.
That is our identity.
That is the identity.
That's it.
Yeah, we have to preach that gospel to ourselves every day.
Yeah.
So we need to use our voice.
Yeah, we still live in what do we live in? A democratic republic? Is that what we are?
Yeah.
I don't want to say it wrong.
A representative
republic. I know there's
Democratic Republic.
All right. So encourage your political representatives to vote for things like fairness for all and against things like the Equality Act, which again is the Religious Discrimination Act.
Yes.
Yes.
So we conclude the gathering storm with faith, hope, and love.
Yeah, and why, we've said this before, but why do we care about these things so much? Because as you just said earlier, Christians hold to what the culture thinks is an archaic worldview that limits human progress and happiness. But the reality is the machine is designed by the designer and it only operates correctly and functions well when you do it according to the blueprint of the designer. What that means is when we stray from God on these points, we do so inevitably to our own harm.
Yes.
That's why we care, because we care about human flourishing.
Yes. Faith is in God's design.
Yes.
That you just mentioned.
Yep.
It's in God's word.
Sola Scriptura.
Yeah.
The authority of God's word.
It has to be in an authority.
God's design, God's word, yes.
And it's faith in the power of the gospel.
Yeah, don't forget, the gospel is still the greatest change agent in the universe.
We, as the local church, have more political power to do good for the world than any other institution on the planet.
Right, because
you say those kinds of things,
have the
people
gospel.
Go, there's no way at all. What we mean by that is what typically the world defines as political change. It's just moving people on the chessboard, and it's not doing anything to like. And it's not really good. It's Band-Aids.
Sure.
Let's say that. It's Band-Aids for the human heart. It doesn't actually make change happen.
Yeah.
So he suggests at the end, faith, hope, and love, quoting from 1 Corinthians 13.
I think hope is a good one.
Yes.
Hope is not, I hope it happens. That's not hope.
No.
Biblical hope is a conviction.
It's not just a feeling.
Right. And maybe it'll turn out this way. Let's all hope so.
Yeah.
Hope is a conviction based on our confidence in Jesus Christ. Look up Hebrews 11:1. It's based on what promises? That God will bring good from everything, Romans 8:28. That he knows how to turn evil actions by men into good purposes, Genesis 50:20, which you quoted the other day.
Love it.
The fact that Jesus said, I will build my church.
I will.
And the gates of hell will not prevail against it, Matthew 16:18.
And he points out Jeremiah 29:5 in this. The instructions to Israel were.
Yes, they were.
Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens.
In exile.
While they're in exile. Right. That's the important context. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their produce. Keep doing this
for the prosperity of
Yeah.
the people, the government you're with. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then lastly, don't forget who wins. God wins. God will one day put everything under Jesus Christ. Ephesians 1:22, Philippians 2:9 through 11, and Revelation 5:13. Jesus, ultimately, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. There's no getting around that.
Yes, indeed.
That's the hope. But you said it. He ends with love. Good thing to be reminded of. We are called to love one another in the faith. We're called to love our neighbor as ourselves.
Yeah.
And we're called to love our enemies. So if we don't approach this from that perspective, we're out of step with God's clearly defined will for us in Scripture. Do you pray for your enemies? Do you love your enemies? Do you love your neighbor? And remember who your neighbor is. Jesus expanded that one.
Yeah.
People who are not like you.
Yes, exactly.
And do you love one another in the faith in such a way that they say, what's different about those people? The way they love each other.
And what you just said is not sentimentality.
No.
It's faith and hope in action.
Yeah.
In ways that people would look at and call love.
Yeah. In the marriage ministry, it's interesting. We often have people say to us, I don't feel like loving my wife and being kind to my wife and extending grace to my wife. So
Well, that's funny because I do 100% of the time.
But they say, so then I feel like I'm a phony if I do. You see how that's reversed?
Absolutely.
If you do it just because you feel like it, what credit is that to you?
That's the therapeutic part of moral therapeutic.
Anybody does that.
Yes.
But if you do it when you don't feel like it, well, now you're actually loving.
That's right. Preach. That's good.
Yes, so come to our marriage ministry.
So come and learn how to have an awesome marriage like mine. So faith, hope, and love are the same things for us today as they were for Paul, suggesting to a context where Christians were in a whole bunch of cultural storm-like stuff.
Yeah. It's not that much different.
No, it's really not.
And we started this book, and we're going to end this book. By the way, you might have thought going through this book, well, the answer is to be Republican, because sometimes he comes across that way.
Well, he unpacks a lot of this in descriptive ways.
Yeah. That's not what we're saying the answer is. We're saying the answer is a coming back to the authority of the Word of God.
Which is what he says.
Yes,
That's
right.
the prescriptive part.
Right. And let's make sure we call that out. The sola scriptura, the authority in the Word of God, that has to be our answer.
Yes. So we have some questions. So let's try to give some good answers here. First question says, if we lose or accept the loss of our nonprofit status because of the passing of laws like the Equality Act, can they prosecute us beyond that by saying that we showed bias or hatred toward the protected communities by not hiring them or by letting them go? Can they prosecute us beyond the nonprofit status issue by saying that we showed bias or hatred toward a protected community by not hiring them in the first place or by letting them go? I think we already answered the by letting them go part.
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer for the by not hiring them part. Discrimination laws already prohibit based on certain protected classes. However, there are religious exemptions.
There are religious. That's the key, is what we don't realize now. There are religious exemptions.
Yes.
There's a number of them.
Yes. So I don't have a good answer for that in terms of how the Equality Act affects all the religious exemptions.
Well, that's the key, is that if it does away with the religious exemptions, then everything we have just been warning about becomes possible.
Yes.
If the religious exemptions are maintained, then not so. But everything that I've read points to the Equality Act to get rid of the religious exemptions. So that
I was just going to say, but I think the Equality Act gets rid of those functionally.
Yeah, that's what I've read.
Yes, me too. So, yes is the answer. They can prosecute us.
If the religious exemptions are gone, yes.
Yes. Next question is, to what extent should we fight for religious freedom? Do the ends justify the means, or should we be willing to turn the other cheek and be willing to suffer persecution for the sake of Christian integrity and witness? To what extent should we fight for religious freedom? Do the ends justify the means? I think we can say the ends do not justify the means.
No, they do not.
Or, and I'm not sure or is the right way to answer that next question, given that that previous question was, do the ends justify the means? Or should we be willing to turn the other cheek and be willing to suffer persecution for the sake of Christian integrity and witness? Yes, we should be willing to turn the other cheek and be willing to suffer persecution for the sake of Christian integrity and witness, regardless of what happens with religious freedom.
Right.
Is that turning the other cheek and suffering religious persecution opposed to fighting for religious freedom? I think not. I think both can happen at the same time. I think that we're going to be required to do both of those things. And I think fighting for religious freedom needn't look like standing at the front of the Capitol building with a crazy hat with horns on.
I'm thankful that you mentioned that, because the fight thing, let's define what we mean by that.
But we can still fight for religious freedom in all of the ways that we know we can and should, that are true, right, good, that don't break laws, that aren't violent, that don't steal Nancy Pelosi's laptop.
Right, and threaten to sell it to the Soviets.
Right. Right. I saw
Look
that.
at me, Soviets. I'm back.
Yeah.
It shows how old I am. The Russians. The Soviets haven't existed since 1989.
So to what extent? I think the extent question depends some on the aforementioned question about Equality Act.
Mm-hmm.
When that goes through, then we go, what does that mean we do now?
Yeah. We're not closing down our doors, if that's what you're thinking, until they drag us out of here.
That's where I am.
I looked up some of the protection for religious employers. I knew I had it in my notes somewhere, so I just want to mention that briefly. So Title VII, that's prohibitions on employment discrimination, including sex. That only applies to employers with 15 or more payrolls.
Yes, I knew
employees
the 15.
on payroll.
Yes,
that's one thing. 1972, there's an exemption for religious employers. This exemption is generally understood to allow religious organizations to make employment decisions based on religion, even for employees not involved in the religious activities of the organization.
Right. It could be those who aren't necessarily doing ordained work or sacramental work, however you want to talk about
1993, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act requires the federal government to show that laws substantially burdening religious exercise are narrowly tailored to achieve a compelling government interest. Like, if you're going to burden religious exercise, you better prove there's a real good reason for it from a government perspective.
Yes, we've talked about that for the compelling
government interest.
Yeah.
2012, the ministerial exception. Supreme Court SCOTUS ruled that an exception precludes ministers from suing their churches for LGBT discrimination, protects the rights of churches to hire and fire clergy, doesn't apply to religious nonprofits or small Christians, and it doesn't define what a minister is. And then in 2020, SCOTUS, in the majority, indicated it was deeply concerned with preserving the promise of the free exercise of religion enshrined in our Constitution, Amendment 1. It just doesn't explain how it's concerned. So those are some of those religious exemptions that exist today, and the Equality Act would effectively eliminate those.
Yeah, I was going to say pretty much nullify, I think, all of those.
At least everyone that I've read says that's what it would do.
That's what I've understood, too. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
A part of the answer to the what extent do we fight for religious freedom, I think we haven't been very much yet. We've taken for granted things that now are being pressed on in our immediate context. And so I think the extent includes say stuff, learn why you think we need it. And it's not just about Christian values need to be verbalized. It's about having a society where actual religious tolerance, in an old school way of talking about it, can be the case. So I think we learn to persuade. I think we talk about it. I think we don't shy from saying, I think religious liberty matters, and here's why.
Yeah.
I think religious freedom matters.
Yeah. And I did look it up again. There's an article that was explaining why the Equality Act offers no exemptions for religious freedom. In fact, the bill would forbid religious organizations and individuals to invoke the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, like the one that I mentioned was already out there. It forbids them from invoking that.
Yikes.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we haven't been needing to fight for religious freedom means that the cultural narrative has come to the point now where for us to even say religious liberty matters means we are part and parcel of a religious privilege whose voice need be suppressed. So I think we feel like we shouldn't, even though we absolutely can, and it's okay to. Now, I'm not saying the church becomes political. No, I don't. Personally, I hardly even care about talking about politics whatsoever as a church, in any real sense of the term. And I don't know if we're there yet, but we may be saying tyrannical powers that keep us from worshiping Jesus need be spoken against.
Sure.
And we need have our cheeks slapped and suffer persecution for the integrity of Christian witness at that point.
Yeah.
I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah. And
but we might be.
Yeah, we're not there yet. But don't forget one of the arguments. Why do churches and nonprofits have a tax exemption to begin with?
This is huge. People don't track with this well,
Right.
but yes, go ahead.
They have it because government recognized it's in their best interest
Absolutely.
to promote the flourishing of religion and nonprofits because it's good for their population.
Which is what we've said. We've quoted John Adams a number of times. Our constitutional democratic republic only works if there is a moral and religious citizenry. I'm not sure I says it that way. But,
no, that's very close.
But that's part of why they're interested in that.
Yeah.
The government, initially at least, recognized that religious nonprofit and all nonprofits are a part of keeping society whole and intact.
And it's less work for the government.
Of course.
When they do their job well.
Yeah.
It's why we support the local food pantry. It's why we support local campuses and we invest in them.
Yeah.
It's why we offer programs like Regeneration to help people get out of addictions that destroy them and their family.
Yeah.
It's why we offer marriage programs to help keep the marriage together and prevent them from being divorced that tears families apart.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're doing these things because it's for the good of our people.
Yeah.
And that includes all people.
Absolutely. And a vision for that at a local level. I've often thought, this is my version of your weird math problem with the sex thing. I thought I would like to do some anecdotal data gathering of preachers and pastors and churches I know locally, and just kind of say, all right, tell me how many people you're doing that kind of work with each week.
Yeah.
How many marriages, how many families, what kind of volume of help with your people in benevolence terms, food-wise, housing, etc.
How many youth do you have connected to a mentor?
If you started to put
keep
that
them
together
off the street,
with one church, you'd go, wow, that is a lot that one little congregation is doing. And then multiply that by the average number of churches in our community, and you realize, holy cow, the local church is keeping our communities intact in ways that go far beyond what most folks recognize. And the government has to continue to recognize that.
That's an argument we need to be able to understand and articulate.
Absolutely.
Youth groups have been used for years to help people who otherwise would have gone down the wrong path, destroyed their lives and others, but they were connected to a young man or a young woman who was a huge impact on them and helped them grow through those formative years. All of that is the work of the church.
Absolutely.
My dad is one of those, by the way. Really? My dad came from a family that was not a believing family, and he was invited to a youth group when he was a teenager, and he went along because it was fun. And I am the product of the change in his life, and my children are the product of that because of a local youth group.
Boom. Good stuff. Next question says, and we got a jam on these next.
Yes, but we did get through the book, so this is good.
Technically, we did.
Well, all right.
Could you give a quick summary of the thesis of the book, and perhaps a suggestion of the next step, the most important next step for Christians to take right now that helps battle the storm of secularism? 3 key insights, I think.
You're ready to roll on this one.
I'm ready to roll. Bring it on.
Go for it.
Insight number 1 is that the church is being impacted by passive and active secularization.
It is.
So secularization and the church. So the passive and active secularization is affecting the church. Passive secularization, not an overt hostile attempt to secularize the church, but it's passive secularization rooted in the fact that we live in a secular culture that seduces us to accept its worldview.
Okay.
Active secularization is an overt hostile attempt to secularize the church, legal action against conservative Christians, etc. So that's the key insight number 1. Church is being impacted by passive and active secularization. Key insight number 2 is that the church must be willing to stand for truth in the midst of sexual anarchy.
Yeah.
Recurring theme in a number of chapters is the realization writ large in culture of the 1% of a person's identity that is the sexual thing, in ways that are a terrible way to conceive of the human being.
Right.
So the church must be willing to stand for truth in the midst of sexual anarchy. There's a lot we could talk about there, but let's just say that. The third key insight is that, and this relates to the religious liberty issue, which he does talk about actually in a number of chapters, summarizes it at the end.
Yeah.
Secularization presents a direct threat to the future of religious liberty. I think we're not there, but we might be. So secularization is a direct threat to the future of religious liberty.
Can I give my 3 as well?
Please.
Those were great. I went back to the very first chapter of our notes because, he often starts the book and you have a feel for where he's going to.
Yes.
And there were 3 things we pulled out of there too that from a Christian answer standpoint, like what can we do? Given what you said,
yes.
What can we do? And the first is respond correctly. We tend to respond negatively in 2 ways. We get discouraged and we isolate.
A lot of people in their reading of this book from the congregation said, I can't do it. It's so discouraging.
Right. Discouragement and choosing isolation is not the answer, or looking for rescue and political victory from the top down, which some of us have done as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's the first thing. We often respond negatively in 2 ways. The answer is neither of those. The answer is, as we've said it multiple times, a renewed commitment to the authority of Scripture as our standard, right? Jesus said, sanctify them. He's talking to his Father in the truth. Your word is truth. And then lastly, when we fear, remember Jesus said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, don't forget your mandate.
Yes.
Go and make disciples. Like that helps us remember when we think the world has authority, no, it's authority on loan and on a leash. The ultimate authority resides in Jesus.
Yeah. That's a good answer. The next question is that the problem with the analogy of the storm is the idea that we can't really do anything about it except build shelter and invite others into it.
Okay.
Although I think the answer is built into the question. Is there really anything we can do about the storm? I think we build shelter and invite others into it.
Yeah, we invite others into it.
Yeah.
The church, for thousands of years, and should continue to be a place where people find truth and healing.
Yeah. And I think I understand that the question came from the assumption that shelter building means removing ourselves from the wider culture and not affecting it. The analogy does break down some, because if what we're doing is building shelter and inviting others into it, that's not so that we're just staying in the hunkered down shelter. Right. This isn't Christ removed from culture.
No.
This is Christ redeeming, at least, going out into the wider culture to proclaim the truth of who he is and what he's done, and that's a part of bringing them in and sending them out. So I think it's gathering and scattering all the time.
Yeah, and hang on to the promises. He has all authority, and he said he will build his church.
Yeah.
That's just going to keep happening, and we just need to remain faithful and focused on that.
Yeah, just like you said about all those things with the authority of the Scriptures. And,
right.
Couple last questions. Should we accept, not meaning should we quit fighting, but should we accept that America is ultimately changing from a country that supports and holds Christian ideals to a more secular society? What would you say to Christians and churches who are worried about the future? Should we accept that America is ultimately changing from a country that supports and holds Christian ideals to a more secular society? I would say a couple things. I'm not sure that we supported and held Christian ideals in a sense. I think it was founded from some natural revelatory, natural law ideas about God has made the world this way.
Right.
That weren't necessarily as specifically about building a Christian nation as many people talked about it.
No.
Though it did have an underpinning of God is real.
Right.
He made the world this way.
Right.
And we want to be free to practice our version of that here.
Yeah. I think that's a better way of putting it.
Yeah. That's just a little more nuanced.
It was never
way.
A Christian nation.
Not in that sense.
Right.
Is there such a thing? When Jesus returns.
Yeah.
So I would nuance that a little bit, but I definitely think we need to accept that that what we've had has changed.
It has.
It is a fully secularized, post-Christian, postmodern deconstruction of truth as a thing world.
Yes, it has changed.
Yeah. What would you say to Christians and churches who are worried about the future? The same things we've been saying, which is do the everyday boring faithfulness stuff of being word-saturated parents, spouses, workers. And it's like the quote from Jeremiah, we're in exile, build houses, plant gardens, do the things we know that are about world making.
Yeah. Be faithful in what you know to do.
Yeah.
And be thankful that God has formed his body, the church, in such a way that it all doesn't rest on you.
Yes.
There's only so much I can do. Well, instead of despairing that I can't do everything, let me be faithful with what I can do.
Mm-hmm.
I love the analogy of the body of Christ.
Yeah.
By myself, I can do very little.
Right.
Together, we can accomplish much.
Yes.
You do what God has gifted you to do and positioned you to do and resourced you to do.
Yeah.
I will do the same.
And the fundamentally important part of being involved in an actual, regular way with who the body is and what the body does to strengthen itself, to be that shelter in the storm that gathers and then scatters. That is how we are encouraged in the middle of it.
Yeah.
If you're not a part of the body when you're undergoing some form of persecution, however slight or great you want to define all that, doesn't matter. If you're not a part of the body, there's no way you're going to be able to do that effectively.
Yeah, you need the body. The body needs you. If you're not sure how do you combat all this, just take the next step. Next step.
Yeah. Last question is, can we watch and talk about cat videos next week?
Yeah, that would be lighter.
I like it.
Yeah.
We're going to do that.
Cat videos.
Actually, what about those houses where they build a house out of, those videos where they build a house out of mud in 2 days?
Oh,
those
I haven't seen that. I'd like to watch that.
I haven't either. I have no idea what he's talking about there.
So your point is it's been a little heavy?
It's been a little heavy.
Point well taken.
But then we can debate how much storm they can withstand. Those mud houses. Yeah.
Please do not live in fear, though. This is to open our eyes so that we are more aware and therefore able to be those better parents and workers and all the things you named. Mm-hmm. But don't fear. The same God who was in charge 2,000 years ago when Christ came is in charge today.
Yeah.
And he will build his church. I'm serious. I'm not afraid of these things.
No, bring it on.
Because I have faith not in me,
but
faith in my Lord. Mm-hmm. It hasn't changed that one iota.
Yeah. What that will continue to do as it presses on Christians is prove the gospel all the more.
Yeah. Yeah. But God will build his church.
Yep. Thanks for joining us, y'all. This has been
Cat Weeks. Cat videos next week. Maybe not. I don't know.
I was just about to say, we're not going to do cat videos or mud houses. We are going to do Sanctity of Human Life.
Yes, which is much broader than people think.
Yes, it is.
Like, we're going to talk about everything from contraception and how does that work and what should you do and not do and where's their gray area and Christians need to decide.
We had one unanswered question a week or two ago about that. Yeah,
but it's everything from contraception to biochemical engineering to vaccines and what they use in their testing process. Like, we're going to cover all of that because it's helpful for Christians to understand. It's not going to be, oh no, the world is crashing. It's just be educated on these things because it's helpful.
And so that's going to be some very active. This is why we as Christians think this range of good options is right and true and helpful. But the culture of death is this. Yeah. So be careful to distinguish between this and this.
Yeah. I hope it's not heavy as much as it is informative and that's helpful. Yeah. Now I can have conversations or with my children or with my spouse on a number of issues.
Yes. Sanctity of human life in a positive way. However, we will talk about abortion.
We will certainly cover abortion. Yeah.
Yes. So join us for that for the next couple to few-ish weeks.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of tentacles to that.
Yeah. And we'll be using the Elders' position paper on Sanctity of Human Life that we've been developing here as a guide for that. So that'll be helpful for some of our own folks to hear.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Thanks for joining us, y'all. See you next week for 45 minutes.
Whatever.
Of
well, we were just finishing the book today.
Brown Bags and Bibles. Thanks for joining us.